Thanks for tuning in to the Lean 911 podcast, where you'll have a voice directly from the Gemba. I will rely on my 3 decades of Lean successes as well as my failures to answer your most challenging questions regarding your Lean transformation. I'm your host, Mark DeLuzio, President and CEO of Lean Horizons Consulting and the Principal Architect of the Danaher Business System. Looking forward to your questions. Now, let's go to the Gemba. Welcome to episode 37 of the Lean 911 podcast. I'm Mark DeLuzio, President and CEO of Lean Horizons Consulting. And once again, I have Kevin Mathis, Managing Director for Lean Horizons. Kevin, you talked about mixed model production, part 1 in the last episode 36. And on episode 37, this is part 2. And we said we wanted to talk about mixed model production in terms of how to go about implementing mixed model and all the things that we need to do. Now, just a little summary here, and I'm going to ask Kevin maybe summarize briefly what we talked about in episode 36, but we are going to talk more specifically about implementation. Kevin and I go way back to the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And that's 1990, by the way, not 1890. Yeah. We worked together at Danaher, and Kevin was the guy who figured out how to do the first lean, first mixed model production line at one of our divisions called Hennessy, that made wheel balancers and tire changers and all kinds of cool stuff that had to be, machined and assembled and all that good stuff. So, Kevin, why don't you go back and just a brief overview of what we talked about, what is a mixed model, why do we do it, and all that, and then we can get more specifically right into the fundamentals of how do you go about doing this.
Sure. The mixed model I'm going to talk about today is around tire changers, right? So the big machine that has an arm, it comes down and breaks the bead on your tire and it takes the tire off the rim without damaging your rim, and then does the same thing in reverse to put it back on, with which there is several different models. And when we think about mixed model, what we're thinking about there is making, say, 3 of model A, 4 of model B, 2 of model C, 5 of model D, in conjunction with our customer demand. So we're taking the customer demand and breaking that down into daily buckets and mixing that rate down the line in a repeatable mix that more closely matches the customer demand. The opposite of that, the way a more traditional way of thinking would be, well, I'm going to run model A for 2 or 3 days, and I'm going to run model B for a day, and then model C for half a day, then model D for a week, or people would do those in much bigger batches. And the advantage of the mixed model was really driving around reducing inventory, being more flexible to meet customer demand. We improve, efficiency in the operation by improving the throughput of process time through the organization. And then, the responsiveness to the customer is a big deal, right? That if orders shifted or there was a mix shift or another issue, we could make it instantly. So it was a good view for how to take care of customers better, how to take care of our people better, and then how to take care of the capital better by flowing inventory faster.
So Kevin, I think the notion here is we want to mirror the demand pattern of our customers as closely as possible to our production schedule.
Correct. And here
So
we actually took our, and I think that when we get to implementation and customer demand's a big thing to think about how we thought about that.
Right.
But we were able to look at customer demand, build shipping loads so that we could optimize freight and delivery to the customer, and then use that to help us sequence the production line so that we could limit the amount of warehouse space and time we had to have in a warehouse to cube out trucks and do those things. So we could really transition to a build to order model and sequence it to the real customer demand. and the delivery
So
schedule.
when you say real customer demand, and I did an episode on this earlier about on-time delivery, Kevin, and I talked about so many companies today measure themselves to customer promise date, but at Danaher we put an edict in that we had to measure the customer request date.
Mhm.
So even though you're trying to optimize your shipping schedules and your freight and all that good stuff, you're still focused on the customer requirement in terms of their requested delivery date. Is that correct?
Correct. That's a driving force
Mhm.
under. We should probably do another podcast about, sales and operating process, and how you think about your production schedule and the Heijunka process and how you plan your load and coordinate with customer demand and production. Um, but here we were the real foundation was what did the customer want and when, and that helped us push back then to when did we have to ship it to meet that date, which pushed back to when did we need to make it to make that date. So we're able to synchronize that flow to the date that the customer asked for the product. And we did
Well,
make that, we had made that switch already to the edict of knowing when your customer really wants it and getting it to them then versus when you promise. And we were transitioning from a stock using stock to do that and piles of inventory of finished goods to building to that demand and hitting that delivery on a sequential basis.
so the shorter you can make your lead time, including things like quick changeovers and what have you, the less reliance you'll need on a finished goods store to ship that demand.
Correct.
When I look at the one of the episodes I did earlier was just talked about the Toyota production system. And
Mhm,
if you look at the Toyota production system, there's really five things on that TPS house that Tayashi created. One of the pillars is called just in time. Uh, the other pillar is called Jidoka, which is the process where the machine detects a defect and doesn't continue to promulgate quality defects. But on the bottom of the house, we have three things: standard work, Heijunka level scheduling, and Kaizen.
mhm,
Now, notice he didn't put there SMED, 5S, TPM. Those are the only three things he put there. And we actually did an episode with Jaime Oba to talk about the basics and what the importance of standard work. So you mentioned Heijunka earlier, Heijunka level scheduling, which is key to this. And of course, I think you're going to talk about standard work and also
mhm,
Kaizen, which you talked about
mhm,
engagement of employees and all that. But one of the things I get all the time, and I'm sure you do too, is people come back to me and say, well, first of all, we can't do mixed model. We can't do standard work
mhm,
because our cycle times are all different. We have so much variety. Uh, another excuse I get is, customers call us at the last minute at 12 o'clock at night and they want it 8 in the morning. And they try to display that that is always the norm.
mhm.
Okay, which it's not, that. But if it is, that fundamentally means their SIOP process is broken.
Yeah.
The sales, production, inventory, operations
Mhm,
planning process is broken, which you're right. That's a subject for another day.
mhm.
Okay. And people like to, project that they live in a world of mystery, in a world of uncertainty, and that their job is so tough and you don't get it and you don't understand. But when you look at your different models that you had, I'm sure the operator cycle times they all varied to some
Yep,
degree.
yep,
How did you guys handle that?
yeah. So I think the first thing was, as we thought about that was, well, what's the takt time? What's the rate with which we need to have the line run? What's the beat? How often does one need to come off, a finished good need to come off the line? So we start with takt time, right? And then you think about, well, now what's the standard work for each step of that process? And what if you know takt time and you know the sum of all the cycle times, you can figure out how many people you need, and then you can balance that. And that's probably a topic for another day too. But what we were able to do was to pull the variation off. So say the takt time was 30 seconds. I'm just making something up. We can't load any single workstation more than 30 seconds, right? And everything needs to be at 30 seconds or less. So we started looking at that work and saying, well, what causes variation within the models, right? So some models have two controllers, some have one controller, maybe some have three buttons and some only have one button. And what are the issues that cause the variation? And then work through how do we deal with that. And many of those things we were able to take and move them to some sub-assembly processes on the outside of the line where the water strider or a person floating across those stations could take care of. In some cases, we're able to move and rebalance and work a little bit, but it was mostly just working through how to keep it at 30 seconds and then pulling the variation back out of that line and dealing with that through a sub-assembly process, or maybe the water strider will put two screws in and then put the part up, or do something like that so that we're confident that the main pace of the line could always run at tag time.
So you try to remove all that variation to outside feeder lines, and then so that would mean then that the operators themselves on the main assembly line would fundamentally have the same work content no matter
Yeah,
what the model is, right?
correct.
I'm sure there wasn't always 100% clean, but in general, you try to get that to be as close as possible. So, and again, this is just a little bit of basic standard work 101. But in Kevin's example, if if the takt time was 30 seconds, which basically means the demand divided into the available time, means that you have to get a part off that line every 30 seconds. No one operator can have more than 30 seconds worth of manual work.
Mhm,
So let's just say that the total manual time it took to assemble one complete unit was 300 seconds, making the math easy.
mhm.
uh, and we
That's
divide that
probably
by takt
different.
time of 30 seconds. That means we need 10 people in that line. And each person working in a one-piece flow environment can't have more than 30 seconds worth of work content. Otherwise, if any one of those people, let's say, had 35 seconds, the drop-off rate on that line would be 35 seconds, and
Mhm,
you wouldn't meet your demand. So that's
correct.
just basic, standard work 101, very basic thinking here, but wanted
Right.
to get people familiar with that in case you weren't familiar with basics of standard work. I mean, it's a lot more detailed than that, but you got to take into account the equipment and stuff like that. But that's a subject for another day.
Right.
So I
Right.
like that idea that you actually took the product and removed as best you could the variation from the line. So now whatever came down that line, is that how you would do it? For example, you would say, my demand schedule says I need, you know, three A's, two B's, and one C. And
Mhm,
then coming down that line again, three A's, two B's, one
correct.
C. You wouldn't make all
Correct.
your A's first, and then your B's, and then your C's. Is that
Correct.
correct?
That's correct. Right. Yeah. So we would build it in that sequence, and then on the offline, variation that we pushed out. In some cases, there might be some standard work in process of one or two parts there
Sure,
that
sure.
the water strider might have assembled to put there. In some cases, there wouldn't have to be. It just depended on the sequence and as volume shifted in the right balance of standard work for that person. But pulling that off allowed us to build that standard rate to takt time in a very repeatable way.
I've also seen situations where once you understand your production schedule of, three A's, two B's, and one C so many times during the shift, that the subcomponents for that next day's production was done in some sense of a Kanban so that it was just a pull and all the operators did during the day was replenish that Kanban,
Sure,
the outside operators. Now, what does that mean? Well, you got an hour day's worth of inventory that you could
sure,
potentially have some quality problems.
sure,
So that's ideally you'd like to sync it as close as you
sure.
can to feed with minimal amount of work in process inventory, from those assembly, those offshoots, assembly cells, subassembly cells to the main line. So it's
Right.
interesting. So again, Kevin, you and I seen companies where they would say, "Hey, no, look, on Monday and Tuesday we're going to make all A's. Then on Wednesday and half of Thursday we're going to make B's, and then the rest of the week we're going to make C's."
Mhm.
Well, if you got a production order that's due on Thursday or let's say on Wednesday, and the customer ordered A, B, and C, you're going to be late.
Right.
Simple
Exactly.
as that, right?
Ex-
I mean,
Exactly.
that's the whole idea of matching the production schedule as closely to the demand requirements is something I think that sometimes gets missed because we're
Mhm.
looking at trying to optimize changeovers, or I should say, minimize changeovers.
Right.
So let's try to batch all our product
Yeah.
families, if you will, part numbers, so that we don't have to do changeovers.
Right.
Well, that
So
doesn't make a lot of
I think
sense, right?
this particular product line had a fabrication area where, we had to do some forming and some welding
Hmm.
and grinding and all the things you do to put together. And we took that mixed model concept back as far as we could until we got to the blank, right? Because, in our view was flow to attack time is what we wanted to get to, and we wanted to minimize the places where we couldn't flow, right? So we just kept working our way back, and maybe we had a pull situation for a while till we could figure it out. But we kept working our situation back till we could reduce the changeover or build a standard work or improve the processes enough that we could then flow to tack time, right?
I've seen that a lot, Kevin, too, where you try to do a mixed model on the main assembly line, but the feeding operations like fabrication, press brakes, stuff like that are not working in that fashion. They're working in a batch fashion. So you end up shorting out the line of critical parts, right?
Yeah.
So the message here, I think, is what you're saying is you have to kind of drive that mixed model mentality all the way through upstream and downstream, right?
Correct. Correct. Yep. Yeah. You have to understand it from, we more or less started at the customer, kept working our way back until we could, get as much as possible to flow to tack time, right? And a one piece flow model and just, kept working our way back. So at first there was a press that we got to figure out how to change over. Well, pretty soon you get to where well, it's not 20 minutes anymore, it's 10 minutes, and it's not 10 minutes, it's 5. And using the Kaizen tools, we're able to keep reducing that time so we can keep it flowing.
It's interesting because if you go back to Jaime Oba's uh, episode that we talked about with basics, his view is that standard work and keeping operators working to standard work, everything should support that notion. So
Mhm.
you don't do SMED without thinking about how is this going to keep the line running with standard work.
Right.
You don't do 5S, you don't do TPM. Any of that stuff on a priority basis is all about keeping the operator successful on standard work. And it's not the
Mhm.
operator, it's the process, really. I
Right.
mean,
Yep.
we have to have processes that perform to standard work. So everything that we do should be in context of that standard work, right? And a lot of people look at all of these things as just separate entities,
Mhm.
and they're not. I mean, they're all connected. Now, speaking of being connected, how did you guys think about your supply base? Because I see so many companies that don't get to a Heijunka level schedule, but put kanbans into their supply base,
Mhm.
order in batch.
Mhm. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And that they actually create capacity problems at the supplier because they
Sure.
had
Yep.
them make all A's when they should have made A's and B's,
Yep.
right? So,
That was one of our learnings really early on is that our as we thought about that process, and we had a real reason to make this happen, and that we need to take care of customers better. We're growing, we're running out of space, we had to make
right.
things flow faster, so there's a real business need. But as we started implementing, one of the first things we did was run out of parts, right? Because we didn't have the process linked to our customers or our suppliers, excuse me, to make them arrive on time, right? So we started working our way back, and then, oh, well, here's a problem. So then how do we solve the problem, right? And we, implemented, one, a better forecasting model with our suppliers so they could see what's coming, and we found out we weren't talking to them very well. And secondly, we implemented a pull system so that they could see that when we use three of something in a day, they got a signal that said, we use three, deliver three more. And we set those up in ways that we could get those parts closer to the sequence that we needed, and therefore, flow the product to that new mix, right? But it was certainly it's certainly a thing you have to think about is as you're implementing all the different parts that you touch, you don't really know all those till you get going, right? And
Hmm.
you're monitoring your production, and you're looking for, why are you not able to achieve your tack time? And then you're problem solving those on a priority basis. And, running out of parts from some suppliers was one of the first things we ran into. And we quickly found out that we were able to work through the 5 why process is what we use, very simple, and go through. So, well, why do we run out of parts, and why didn't they show up? And why didn't they know we needed them? And you start working through that process and mapping it out, and you can start to solve those problems. Um, but we would have we were also sending, by not communicating with our suppliers previous to that, we were sending them really bad information and untimely information, and forcing them to carry extra inventory and respond to us and pay an extra freight cost because we were masking the problem with batch processing. And as we took that batch processing down to the mixed model production, then we could start to see those problems, which allowed us to fix them, which made us much more responsive.
It's funny how the whole notion of the reason people default to batch is to become more efficient,
Hmm.
which is so it's an oxymoron, isn't it? I mean,
It
it's
is. It is. It is. And what we do is we know from experience that that's not true.
Mhm.
Um, but you also have to have a problem-solving mindset to know that as you uncover those problems and you lower the inventory and you uncover those problems, then those are opportunities for you to go make your operation better, and you can improve safety, quality, delivery, and costs by attacking those problems and opportunities that you find by lowering the inventory and flowing things through faster.
It's funny because this stuff doesn't work when you have absorption accounting
No.
and or OEE measures where there's less incentive to change over, less incentive to do even preventive maintenance, and it's just like we're to keep the operations running. So just make a bunch of stuff,
Mhm.
right? And it doesn't
Yep.
matter what we make because the accountants will be happy because their absorption variances will be favorable.
Yep.
Meanwhile, we're losing business, right?
Exactly.
And tell me about this, Kevin. So we talked about the bottom of the house we talked about just in time. Okay, we
Hmm.
talked about the fact that try to meet the customer demand when they want it, in the
Hmm.
quantity they want it, at the time that they want it. You talked about standard work. You also talked about Heijunka level scheduling. And the other thing that's on the bottom of that house is Kaizen. Tell me about the
Hmm.
people. Did it benefit the people? How did they take to it? What were the benefits or the cons, right? To this? How did it affect your workforce and all that? Give me your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it was an interesting transition, right? Because we're coming from not really, knowing about how this is going to work you know, to changing the way we think about the line, thinking about production, thinking about the flow, thinking about what the standard work might be, and people are, first kind of taken aback and not really sure what's going to happen. What we chose to do was use the Kaizen process and work through this process and involve the team on the Kaizen teams, right? So we would have Kaizens every week going on, and people, rotating through working on the teams and helping us figure it out, right? And soon they began to see the benefits of this and see how they could implement things that they knew would improve their production process, but they hadn't been able to implement yet. And that is, like a flywheel, right? It gets going and goes faster and faster and faster. And the engagement, the satisfaction with getting work done, the can-do attitude, the what I would say extra effort of being willing to put in that little bit of extra or come in 15 minutes early to work on your fixture to make it a little better, that kind of thing really accelerates. And that's a fascinating thing to watch and that we were a part of and it's really the first time I'd really gotten to see that all the way through. But it's a huge benefit. Morale goes up, engagement goes up, people's enjoyment at work and working together, and the ability to think about problems and think about how can I fix this, not waiting for someone else to fix it for them. It
Yep.
really makes a big adjustment, and that's one of the huge benefits that we see in the Kaizen process everywhere is that engagement with having employees and team members all involved does drive engagement. It does drive morale. It does drive teamwork. It drives a complete change in the way you think about business. It's more fun, right? They get to solve their own problems. They get to work on stuff. And they're engaged. They get to use their minds and not just their bodies and doing the labor of
Sure.
assembly or whatever. It's a big thing.
Let me ask you this question. Were you, I can't remember, were you guys union?
We were.
Okay, how'd you get around that with job classifications and all that? Because you may be saying, okay, tech time today is 30 seconds, so, you know, Mr. Operator, Mrs. Operator, you're going to have to do job, step number 17 through 27. And once your tech time changes, you have to reassign the work. And I'm sure you
Mhm.
did job rotation as well. So, how did we get around that with the contract and with the job classifications?
Yeah. So we had one we were blessed, we had a team that worked really well with us and was engaged in what we were doing. And the first thing we did was uh, um, brought in the union leadership and said, this is what we're going to try to do, and this is why. And we got them engaged in helping with the process, right? And so, and the way our classifications were, assembler was an assembler, so we could move that work around a little bit.
Oh, I see. Okay, got it.
But that wasn't the issue. Now to go to do a machinist or a fabrication job or something like that, we had to either you know put someone in that classification there, or if we move someone there, they obviously got the whatever the higher pay rate or whatever the right pay rate was. Um, but for the most part, by engaging them in the process and helping them understand the benefits of that, and letting them participate, we really had not really any issues with a lot of arguments or troubles getting workers to go to where we need them to go.
Did you have did you offer a no layoff policy because of lean improvements?
Yeah, we had that was from day one, right? So, and that was one of Danaher's things, but it's a critical element of lean and a lean transformation. Um, and the employees weren't going to help us if we were going to lay them off because they improve productivity, right? Why would they, right? They want to
Yep,
protect each
yep.
other and they're all friends, they want to work. Um, but we were growing and so that wasn't ever an issue to overcome. But you know what, it can't be successful if you don't have that policy. And to be honest, if you're going to if you're gonna do that, then save your time and just do something different because it's not gonna
Not going to
work.
work. See, I knew the answer to that question, but I just wanted to be
Yeah,
a straight man here. But
yeah.
yeah, and so many people have not done that, Kevin. They have not guaranteed that. So I just had the conversation earlier with a client who has this issue, and told them that operators will actually find creative ways to secure their employment, and you'll
Yeah,
never know. You'll never
for
know what
sure.
they're doing.
For sure.
When that machine starts sounding a little bit funny, I'm not going to mention it to anybody, right?
Yeah, no, for sure.
When you're driving your car and your car starts sounding funny, you drive it every day. You
Hmm.
know something's wrong with it when you hear something different, right? You take it into the shop, right? Well, I'm not going
Yeah,
to say I'm not. I mean, my machine starts acting up and it starts making funny noises. I'm just not going to say anything. It's
right,
going to break down. You're going to miss your shipments. And oh, yeah, by the way, I get my overtime,
right,
right? You
exactly,
can't lay me
exactly.
off, right? And
Yep.
and and I've seen that happen time and time again. One of the things that we did at Jake Break, so we had a situation maybe a little bit different because we had machining, assembly, we had testing, we had all these things that we put together in a one-piece flow cell. So we went to multi-skill blocks, and we went to 7 skill blocks, one being machining, one being assembly, one being testing, and all that. So when operators learned those skill blocks, they got a kicker in their base pay.
Hmm.
When you got all 7, you were known as a multi-skill operator, and you got the top pay, right?
Sure,
So
sure.
people were clamoring to learn all these different jobs. Okay.
Hmm.
Um, so now it doesn't matter if, so we got rid of like 70 job classifications.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
70 of them.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
And went down to 7 skill blocks. The mistake we made was we didn't do a good job recertifying people, because if you, let's say you got certified in machining, but you didn't do machining for 6 months. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Well, guess what? You didn't get, you lost your skills
You
or by
lose the
not doing
skill
it.
set.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
So we didn't do a good job, but the key to that one is just to rotate people quite a
Mm-hmm.
bit so that they get those skills are staying fresh.
Mm-hmm.
So, but other than that, though, that's the thought process, and of course, we did have that no layoff policy, right?
Yeah.
So that was
Yeah.
key.
In
But
this case that we're talking about, what we ended up doing was rotate because there was a lot of variations in the stations, and what the mix would change from, essentially we set the mix every week, but we rotated the assemblers through all those workstations. So every day they were in a different station, so they just kept rotating. And so one, that gave us a lot of flexibility if someone was gone or the mix shifted, and two is they enjoyed it more. The work wasn't as monotonous. They got to change what they
it's
did
variety,
and
yeah,
try different things,
yeah.
and then they would have different ideas on how to improve those workstations, and they'd work with their teammates to continually improve those stations. So that rotation and cross training is a big deal. It certainly helps drive, safety, quality, delivery, and cost. It drives all those things, and helps contribute positively to the way the organization works.
Well, what about the idea that operator number 2 now has done operation number 8, and it's like I know what that operation needs, and then makes improvements there that says I think when I get to this part gets to operation 8, if I do this differently, it's going to be a benefit to that operation.
Yep,
And without having that cross fertilization, you're never going to get that, right?
exactly, exactly.
And I've seen that happen. One of the things I've seen though that backfired on us in one of our companies, we had a brazing operation in the cell, and it was hot and it was ugly, and nobody wanted to do it. So we were rotating on a daily basis. Okay, so on Monday, you would do the first set of operations, and then you move to 2, and then you move to 3. Well, when you move to brazing, it seems like every time somebody was assigned brazing, that was the highest absenteeism.
Yeah,
So
that's
what
a
we did is we rotated during the day,
yeah,
2 hours here, 2 hours there. So everybody got it every day, so
yeah.
that people wouldn't be calling out when they were assigned to
Yeah,
that particular
that's
operation.
interesting. Yeah.
That actually backfired on us, but so we fixed that by just doing daily, during the day rotation type thing. So yeah.
I guess the question would be is how would you make that job so that people want to do it?
Well, it's a real good question because it's a reflection of a bad process.
Hmm. Hmm.
It really is. And that's the key that a lot of people don't understand. When you don't make your productivity numbers, It's not because you got lousy operators, or maybe they're not trained, and that's your fault.
Mhm.
But it's also a reflection of, geez, the process doesn't work.
Right.
I just had this conversation the other day with somebody who called in on the Lean 911 podcast. Well, called in, they emailed me, and they said, "Hey, we get wide variations of operators doing the same job,
Mhm.
and we want to bring HR in and talk to the people, and they're focused on the people."
Mhm.
My
Mhm.
answer to them was, "It's not a people issue.
Right.
Now, look, if they're not trained, that's one thing, okay, but
Mhm.
if they are trained, it's a focus on the process. If you can't repeat the
Right.
process." And
Mhm.
I repeated the notion that said that Toyota, we learned from Toyota that they get brilliant results with ordinary people running brilliant processes.
Mhm.
So when you can't make it, and if you're looking at your people first, you got to look at the process first. Look
Right.
at yourself
Right.
first, because you as leaders are responsible for assuring good, repeatable processes that are not tasking like that brazen operation, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
If somebody just doesn't want to do the work and it's tiring, and this is why we don't allow fatigue in standard work.
Right.
We want to see the fatigue. Why? Because we got to create processes that don't fatigue our people, and that's a
Mhm.
whole
Right.
different
Right.
approach. I go crazy when I hear people say, "Oh, standard work is just like industrial engineering studies."
Right.
No, it's not. No, it's not at all. But Kevin, this is great. Any other thoughts?
No, I think that, as you think about the process of building to customer demand, building
Right.
standardized processes around that, engaging the workforce to help you implement and get engaged in Kaizen, and
Yep.
then trying to flow to takt time everywhere you can, and keep working that process, you'll get there, right? But that would be the real keys to kind of think through of, if I'm going to implement mixed model, how would I go about that? Those are the things I would think about.
You know, I I like to use the example. I might have used it last time, but put things in very layman type
Mhm.
everyday terms. I've asked people, they say, well, why should we do mixed model? Why should we do more changeovers, right?
Mhm.
And I just say, well, did you ever have a barbecue in your backyard, right? And let's say you're making hamburgers and hot dogs for 20 people. Do
Yeah.
you only make all the hamburgers first?
Mhm.
Well, no. Oh, that means you must make all the hot dogs first. No, we don't do that either. Well, why not? You make them both. You make
Yeah.
hamburgers and hot dogs. Why? Because some of your guests want hamburgers, some want hot dogs, and
Right.
some want both,
Exactly.
like me. And that you want them to eat together. Well, when you
Right.
look at a production order and you got those 5 or 6 or 8 different brake models that you talked
Mhm.
about,
Yep.
okay, or tire changes, I
Tire
think,
changers. Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Okay. Well, if the customer is ordering all of those and they all want them on one delivery date, how could you make all part A on Monday and Tuesday
Right.
when on Wednesday you got to ship all five, you know?
Right.
So
Right.
so that's the whole concept, to marry that production plan as close as possible to your demand schedule, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So and it changes, right? I mean, that's more of an SNLP process where over the course of time, how often did you change the mix of that production schedule?
We changed the mix weekly,
Okay.
and we changed the overall tack time monthly-ish. So sometimes a little more, sometimes less, depending on what was happening with volume. Part of the things that we had to build was a very robust sales and operations planning process, so we could see what that demand was going to be. Because you go backwards a little bit, but you need to be in tune with your customer and understand what your customer needs and when they need it.
Right.
So you can staff and build your standard work and notify suppliers and all those things you have to do. So, we had to build that foundational process, but it, weekly we changed the mix, unless something, really significantly happened. But we have built enough flexibility that if we needed to shift, we could.
Yeah, and that's another good point, by the way, maybe beyond the scope of what we're talking about here. But first couple points that come to mind is standard work is a verb. It's not a noun. It's not something you did. It's something you do to run the business and to
Mhm.
make improvements, right?
Mhm.
So your standard work had to change Well, first of all, if you change tack time, your tack
Yep.
standard work definitely changes,
Network
right?
changes, yeah,
Okay. And then, of course, the sequence might change that standard work
yeah.
too. Okay.
Yep, it does.
The other thing is getting the commercial team in concert with what you're doing so that when they take an order for 50,000 A's, you ask the customer, well, do you really need 50,000 by June 1st, or do you need 10,000 a month for the next 5 months?
Right.
That doesn't happen a lot because a lot of times
No,
our
no,
compensation programs or sales comp programs are based on our orders, not on
sure,
on our shipments, not on our orders.
sure.
So you end up at Mira and Miri, unevenness, unreasonableness,
Mhm.
um, with just that policy alone.
Yep,
And how does that, and that affects your mixed model
yep,
operations, right? I
yep,
mean,
yep.
when you got the sales department just creating, actually incentivizing their customers to violate just-in-time thinking.
Right,
I
right.
mean, that's what that is, right?
Yep, exactly,
That's
exactly,
why everybody has to be on the same page. So,
exactly, exactly.
well,
And yeah, I think talking about sales operations planning, inventory planning, it's probably another topic for another day, but
sure.
it was a foundational element. And you talked about Heijunka level loading being at the bottom foundation of the house. It was a foundational element to being able to do this, right? Because we had to get the whole organization to what's the real customer demand, not what does a sales guy say. And that's a very important factor to think about as you're planning what that production level is going to be.
It's funny, when the salespeople say, well, you're asking us to predict the future,
Mhm.
right? But then they have these kind of behaviors.
Yeah,
The future is pretty easy to predict if they're doing that, right? I mean,
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah,
well, this is great. Okay, so to sum this up, I mean, mixed model is not easy to do, and you need to get the basics down first. But you almost have to have the ability to do standard work, for example, as a muscle memory type of thing, where it's not
yeah,
always a big hurdle for you to get that done,
right,
and incorporate playbooks and all that for these different type of configurations for your standard work, right?
right,
Uh, but I think if you kind of look at the Toyota Production System house, you kind of check most of the boxes there,
yeah, for sure.
and
Yeah,
I think that's benefit. And and again, it was great because it was early in our maturation on the Danaher business system, which you
yeah,
were part of contributing towards putting that together. And you were the first mixed model line in Danaher. I'll bet you there's all kinds of people
for
listening to
sure.
this are going to say, "No, we were first. No, we were first. No, you
For
weren't."
sure.
I
Yeah,
was the guy that went around every company.
yeah,
We
yeah.
weren't even doing it at Jake Break. So where it all started, okay. Uh, so yeah, that was a real benefit, and you guys did a nice job there in terms of how you all, you know, handle all the whole Kaizen infrastructure and the
Mhm.
framework of that. So,
Yeah,
but
it's
all right,
fun. It's fun.
Kevin, this is great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. So
Yeah,
we got a
thank
lot of other
you.
things to talk about,
Yeah,
but
for sure. Yeah, we'll get those on the
let's leave
table.
this one. Yeah, let's leave this one where it is.
Okay.
And if there's any questions on mixed model, please send them in. You know, and I would just probably leave everybody with this last thought to say, please focus on the commonalities more so than you do your differences, because you'll
Hmm,
talk
hmm.
yourself out of it
Yep,
and you'll
yep,
convince yourself how tough your job is
yep.
and all that. I remember George Sherman telling a company vice president, geez, John, you're doing a great job convincing yourself how tough your job is. Maybe we can
Sure.
find somebody who
Yeah.
doesn't think it's that tough. So
Yeah, I think you just have to flip the question around to say, how am I going to do it? And just start solving one problem at a time.
hey, look, if
And,
you're going to be
and get
successful and grow the business and satisfy your customers, it's a non-option, right?
yeah, exactly.
Another question is how exactly, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Kevin, thanks. This was
Yep,
episode
yep.
37. I'm sorry, one more thing.
Nope, that's it. No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, this is Mixed Model Production Part 2. Okay, we did the introduction in episode 36. This is episode 37 with Kevin Mathis, Managing Director, Lean Horizons, former Danaher, former HNI and Han. George Koenigsaker stole you from us after,
Yeah.
and I don't blame him anyway.
George is a good man. Yeah.
George is a great man. Yeah, we got to try to get him on the podcast. So,
Yeah.
but okay, Kevin, thanks. That was helpful. I hope everybody can learn from this. And it's not easy. Yeah, you will struggle, but the benefits are more than worth it. So, we'll see you guys all next time.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, take care. Thanks for listening to the Lean 911 podcast. I'll be happy to address your questions or feedback on future episodes. Email me at mark@lean911.com. You can check out our other episodes by visiting our website at lean911.com, our YouTube channel, wherever you listen to podcasts. This is your host, Mark DeLuzio. Thanks for listening.